mail and excise taxes, the federal government was invisible in most people's lives in the early 1900s.
I think the founding father of American progressivism is Woodrow Wilson. Most people look at Teddy Roosevelt, who's the obvious national progressive, a person who ran under the Progressive Party banner in 1912, ran under the Progressive Party platform.
Wilson, far more than Roosevelt, is a true egghead. He is a true academic, a true intellectual. He thinks he knows more than everybody else.
He was heavily influenced at university and in his graduate work by people who had come from Germany, people who were educated in Germany, people who had imbibed all of the German state theory that was so popular in the middle of the 19th century. He began to look at government as something that was evolving, something that was organic, something that was alive. All of these people were educated at the top institutions of higher learning in this country, and those places had as faculty folks who had been educated in these progressive ideas in Europe.
Roosevelt felt he knew more than everybody else. I feel it in my gut, but he could be persuaded he's wrong, and he's deeply patriotic. I never get the sense from Wilson that he's deeply patriotic, that he loves this country. So he's the first progressive president, and he intends to change American society without going through the steps that the founders set up to change American society.
And the idea that Wilson came away with, again, was that you could have the perfectibility of mankind, you could plan and solve problems with government. And these ideas made, to Wilson, the Constitution seem very outmoded.
The early Wilson administration implemented several independent regulatory commissions, not run by Congress so much, but run by experts who don't have to run for re-election. Who can exercise vast amounts of power in an unaccountable way. Progressives thought that a good thing.
Many of the most religious people, the social gospel movement, they saw this new intellectual fad of progressivism, and they basically bent it to Christianity. It's no coincidence that the communists, the Nazis, the fascists, the progressives, all of them promised to deliver a kingdom of heaven on earth. Powerful forces are arguing that that Jesus was the first socialist, that he was the first eugenicist. Everyone is trying to bend Christianity to the scientific and industrial and economic revolutions that are coming, and what you end up getting is a heresy.
Wilson believed that inequalities were tragic in society.
He was a deeply religious man. He was the son of a minister brought up in a serious religious household. And so he had a real sense of divine mission.
Redistributing the wealth was one way to get wealth from people who had a surplus to people who had too little.
Well, the whole progressive model of redistribution cuts directly against the founders' understanding of property rights.
Freedom meant it's a right that you are endowed with by your Creator. No government can give you freedom. Certain inalienable rights come with that freedom: life, liberty, property.
Progressives knew that that understanding of rights was an obstacle to the kind of government they had in mind. They were for redistribution of wealth.
Wealthy people have too much. It needs to be taken away. So sometimes you get high taxes on wealth.
It's really greed and envy. You want to levy taxes on the rich because you really deep down hate the rich and you're envious of them and you want to take their money. Just be honest about it.
I would argue the central idea of American liberalism or American progressivism, whatever you want to call it, is the idea of the moral equivalent of war.
Things will work in a war that never will work in peacetime, because in a war people are willing to sacrifice. They're willing to do without civil rights very temporarily for their survival.
The role of Bismarck's Germany, which was this Prussian, military, regimented society, was huge on the minds of American progressive intellectuals. And so you have like the New Republic, which is essentially founded to support Teddy Roosevelt and his war policies and all of that, leaps headlong into supporting Woodrow Wilson, his opponent. That's why that phrase, "we planned in war," was so important. They were saying, hey, we planned in war. See, the planning was so good. That's why we need this moral equivalent of war now in the 1920s to copy what we were doing back then.
Wilson moves ahead with his progressivism to try and change America, and he is, of course, greatly aided with this in the war. And the war gives him the cover to silence almost all critics across the board.
You have goons arresting people in public, you have political prisoners, you have censorship, you have war socialism, you have big business and government colluding, you have ideology and propaganda and all that kind of stuff going on. And the Americans, because they are fundamentally a liberty-loving people, reject all that and embrace the return to normalcy.
Woodrow Wilson used to talk about the Constitution as something that if it didn't adapt, if we couldn't read it flexibly, if we couldn't read it liberally, it would perish, and we would perish.
There's no question he is among the first to take this view that it's okay if we modify or change the Constitution without the amendment process or outside of the amendment process.
The reason why they came to look at the Constitution that way is because they understood, they knew that the original Constitution, if it was to be interpreted as it was written, was a huge roadblock to the progressive policy agenda.
Under Wilson, they were telling people what to do. They were forcing people to march in lockstep. They were, putting out propaganda and arresting dissidents and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, as quick as you can bat an eye, the war ends, and the American people say, enough of that.